Okay, welcome everybody to our lunch panel. Tina Mendoza and I are pleased to co-moderate the session with some really great dynamic speakers who are going to introduce themselves in just a moment. We'd like to take a brief moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Karen Wong, and I am a faculty coordinator of institutional effectiveness and also professor of English at Skyline College, which is about 10 minutes south of San Francisco. And with me is Tina.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tina Mendoza. I am a history professor at Taft College, and I'm also the SLO coordinator at Taft College. And welcome. Hopefully this will be a really great talk. And if you have questions, please use the Q&A, and I'll be happy to share them with the panelists.
Yes, and we see this panel discussion as being really an organic conversation. I think what's been really great so far about all these sessions is that the presentations themselves have been informative and really inspiring. And also there have been like these parallel conversations that are happening on chat. And so please do use that to put in your comments, your responses, and especially your questions. We'd like to prioritize the questions that you have to these great speakers that we have lined up today. They're going to take a moment to introduce themselves. And how about we'll go in the direction of just alphabetically based on your first name.
Okay, then I'm up. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Levy, and I serve as the Executive Director for Assessment Accreditation at National Louis University, which is in Chicago, Illinois. It is a medium-sized, private, nonprofit, urban, access-oriented Hispanic-serving institution that grants from associate's degrees up to doctoral degrees. And I'm also here, the other cap that I'm wearing is I'm representing the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders Organization, which is a volunteer group that is, as its name implies, aligned to helping support and advance student affairs assessment related work.
Go ahead, Nancy. Yeah,
Sorry,
you're next, Nancy.
I needed to unmute myself. As I warned the moderators, I'm notoriously bad at multitasking in Zoom. So, Joe, you left off your NILOA affiliation. Okay, so my name is Nancy Kwong Wyckham. I am a professor of history at Long Beach State University. I was formerly a senior assessment specialist at Washington State University. I do a lot of assessment consulting, and I wear a number of hats. I'm active within the American Historical Association, a variety of initiatives. I am an endorsed, like Joe, an endorsed speaker, former coach with NILOA. I am also a disciplinary specialist with the John Gardner Institute. In the History Gateways project, and I am a Quality Matters facilitator for a variety of those courses, and course reviewer, master reviewer, and also sort of on the side, a Superior Court mediator, volunteer.
Right, so good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Stacey Teters, and I'm the third member of the panelists here today. And in my role, I am a Guided Pathways Regional Coordinator. So I get to interface a lot with colleges in my particular region, in the San Diego Imperial region, helping practitioners implement student-centered, equity-minded guide pathways. And I'm a part of actually a larger team of guide pathways regional coordinators who are spread out across the state, who serve every region and who serve every community college with free resources and support, working with a variety of stakeholders from identified, campus leaders to guide pathways leaders, equity leaders, also classified professionals, other faculty members who are doing work. And then, of course, some near and dear to my heart, the institutional effectiveness and research practitioners, including assessment professionals as well. And this is something that really, I'm excited to be here today to talk about, and I've been part of this community for a while now, but Guide Pathways is so related to the work that we all do, right? To make sure that we're ensuring equitable learning for students. And so I'm excited for that part of the discussion today. Other little bits about me, the Guide Pathways Regional Coordinator team is actually housed within the Success Center for California Community Colleges, which is under the Foundation for California Community Colleges. We work and collaboratively with the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office to provide that support directly to the field. So you can think of us as coaches, as supports that can come in for free to help you with a variety of things that you might need, and really to make sure that it's customized and tailored to your current situation and environment of which you're trying to do this really impactful work in. And then just on the side, I am also come to this role as being a former institutional researcher who's worked at a variety of community colleges down here in the San Diego region. So this is really a passion of mine, and I'm finishing up my doctoral degree right now at San Diego State, hopefully this semester, on the topic. My dissertation topic is on guide pathways, equity, and leadership, and how those all work together. So excited. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. All of you are very deeply involved in impactful work for sure. What we wanted to do is just start off with more of a general question. All of you are engaged in some level with assessment of supporting student learning, of equitable learning. And so we've been at this for 15, 20 years. The question is, what do you think are the areas of focus of assessment? Should the areas of focus be, and what should be the next steps? And I want to remind the audience, please do pose your questions in the chat and also comments.
I'm happy to kick it off. And, you know, I was just having this conversation by email this morning and with some folks earlier this week. But, you know, I think one of the things, at least, that we're seeing, which is being driven by accreditation, is that more institutions are finally getting serious about student affairs and co-curricular assessment efforts, which, you know, has been around, you know, not as long as academic assessment, but has certainly been around for decades. But, you know, it's been interesting to watch the slow churn of more and more institutions doing it. My suspicion, and when I've consulted with them and talked to them, it's largely been like, oh, we're gearing up for our accreditation, or we just had our accreditation. So in a good way, accreditors are nudging more institutions in that space of making sure that we're not just recognizing and helping support learning inside the classroom, but truly looking at the full student's experience. So certainly, I think that's a continued area of emphasis. And with that, I think institutions, even where that activity is happening, need to do a better job of collaborating and sharing that information among one another, because with respect to a student's development and ultimately their success, they're not necessarily drawing hard lines or assuming that faculty are not talking to advisors or talking to, you know, other staff. And but unfortunately, sometimes on the staff and employee side, that is what's happening, is they're not talking to one another because of hard, you know, divisional or department lines. So we need to do a better job talking and sharing information to best support student success. And the last thing I'll throw in before getting some other thoughts from the other panelists is, I think we also have to, as much as institutions still need to in all ways be more student ready and student oriented, we also need to, you know, wholesale recognize that the current now traditional learner is an adult student. It's not the 18 to 21-year-old. They are working, they likely have families, they may or may not have some prior college experience. And I just don't think typical current higher education structures, from orientation and enrollment and websites to actual programs and support services and ways to be involved and engaged and feel like they belong with the institution, are best set up to receive and support and nurture adult learners. And so I think assessment is, as much as there's, disaggregation and paying attention to specific student populations and identities abound, I think age and adult and recognizing adult learners as a population of interest is only going to become more of an important stakeholder.
Yeah. Can I amplify a couple of things you said, Joe? I do think that there needs to be much closer connections between the student affairs assessment and the academic affairs assessment, on the two sides of the houses, the institutional houses. I'm not so sure. I think that, in large institutions and in probably a lot of community colleges, at least the ones that I've worked with, faculty don't speak to advisors. I mean, we don't. Advisors keep all kinds of stuff. I mean, we don't even have access to, I can't find out anything about a student in my class unless I ask him or her. I can't find out what kind of advice they've gotten on their degree plan, for instance. To give you an example, there are all kinds of secret information, and it's secret on both sides of the houses. It's not just student affairs is keeping it, it's academic. I can't find out what my own department is doing in assessment. I know they're not doing anything, but that's sort of beside the point. I do think that, as an example, when I was at WSU, we had an academic program that had a mandatory field experience for their adult learners. It was essentially a degree completion program, very large population, about 2,000 students. They had a field experiences program, which they needed to address or assess rather, because it was part of their senior experience. The field experience was nothing more than service learning, and it was individually placed service learning. And so the faculty were developing this assessment instrument and running it by me. And I thought, wait, what about the student volunteer office? And guess what? They already had an assessment for all the service learning that students were doing within the entire university. They had that tool. So here we are duplicating effort. And then to amplify the point about adult learners, I think we need to sort of redefine what an adult learner is. And I think this is driven demographically. I had a student, and I've repeated this story a couple of times. I had a student a year ago in a junior methods course in history, a young Latino man. He impressed me as exceedingly polite, and I could never sort of put my finger on what it was about him that was so remarkable. A good student, but was always late on assignments. And he was 21 years old. So typical student age. Treated like a typical student by institution. I asked him, so one day I asked him, well, why are your assignments all late? And he says, it's because of work during the pandemic. And I said, but that's everybody's point. And I don't penalize for late assignments as long as you let me know what's going on. And he said, well, I'm a little hesitant to tell you. And I said, look, it's between us. And he gave me permission to share. And I said, well, what? He said, I work at my family's funeral home. I'm a mortician. 21 years, he's a mortician in the middle of a pandemic, working 70 or 80-hour work weeks. So this really sort of, for me, like reinforced my view that what an adult learner is really does need to be redefined, because they can be 18-year-old kids who are out on their own and have been out on their own for a year or two. So.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And I'm just already feeling super inspired by the conversation and where this is potentially headed. But it really just makes me think of what I'm starting to see opportunity-wise about humanizing these learning environments, right? Not only for the students, but for ourselves as communities of educators. And I mean that in a very broad sense of, it's not just instructional faculty, right? But it's everyone at a campus who, you know, might have a directly student-facing role versus those who are supporting those who are having those direct facing roles as well. But there is so much, I think, potential-wise that we're already seeing some of these changes happening around the de-siloing, right? Going back to what you were sharing, Joe, around that need to de-silo student services and instruction, because people can learn from one another, right? Go figure that when you get to talk with others and get different perspectives, it increases the innovation and the sharing. And instead of recreating the wheel, we're spending more energy on that, creating an imaginal space in collaboration with one another. And then it's also just exciting to work in a place where collaboration is happening versus the pockets of silos, I think, that we're so historically been entrenched in. And so that's why I'm really excited about how we're trying to move forward with creating equity-minded guided pathways, is because we realize we've set up these artificial divisions and spaces. Students don't see that, right? Or if they see that, that's because we've made them see that. Their learning journey should not have those divisions within it. It should really be about the student at the center, right? Talking about our approach and philosophy, but then thinking about the support systems that we're providing around them, from instructional faculty who are working with them in classroom, online, or in-person spaces, but then the whole team of people who really support. They see you as individual humans, right? And you need to see and acknowledge the other people and the other humans in your space as well. So I think there's a lot kind of happening within the guided pathways sphere that's helping to de-silo those spaces. And in terms of assessment, I think that's already, as we're getting more into these ensure learning conversations, which I'm excited about, because I feel like that's really been left out of a lot of the guided pathways focus up to this point. We're really starting to have more of a focus on instruction and what's happening in these learning spaces, right? What are we actually doing to humanize learning environments for students, so that we're thinking about assessment differently, right? We're thinking about transparent course design. We're thinking about how programs and courses connect with each other so it makes sense for students. I've been, and we mentioned this in our presentation that we just gave, me and a colleague before this session, clarity is kindness for students too. And providing those opportunities, I think we're starting to see, we're on the cusp of that, right? That cutting edge work. And so that gives me a lot of heart and inspiration, I think, for where we're headed. Even in these really trying times, we're seeing a lot of innovation and collaboration starting to happen, and people thinking in more holistic ways.
Two thoughts I just would follow up with there, and I love what Stacey was saying of, and I've been seeing it too. I think institutions are doing a really good job beefing up like their centers for teaching and learning, and trying also to bring in more of practitioner scholars and inviting staff, so that these, the scholarships around teaching and learning aren't just faculty focused. But one of the things that I feel like is still slow to catch up to that, and puts even more pressure on those institutional efforts, is that we're not seeing as much of the systematic changes in the preparation to get to the roles, right? We're not seeing people who are on faculty tracks being tasked with learning about teaching strategies or learning about student development. Instead it's that, they get what they get, maybe, and maybe they have a good mentor in their graduate programs, but then it's this pressure of, oh, if you can pick it up while on the job, while you're teaching and working with your students and trying to best support them. But then another thought that I had as well, about as we think about future and both past and current and future, is there's a lot of new products going on the market in terms of degrees and credentials, where we're unbundling and talking about stacking them. But as was coming up a little in the chat, I don't think we're keeping up with that in terms of the expectations of then what that might mean for faculty and staff roles, right? If you're typically taking this, this complete journey of an academic program and the faculty roles and responsibilities supporting students along that journey, as well as the staff roles that may be supporting students on that journey. And then you start cutting that up or saying, well, go on this pathway for this and go on this pathway for this, and then you can stay on or take this on ramp. And I don't think that we as higher education have been as responsive as we should to imagine and talk and listen to our students about what support looks like, what instruction looks like, what counseling looks like, what mentoring looks like among faculty and staff, as well as even like mentoring, peer-to-peer mentoring with students when we begin introducing more of those non-traditional credentials and pushing students into that. And I bring it up not to get too way off topic, but then we're having this conversation at our institution of, okay, and then what does assessment look like for that? Because you're not going to put like a 3-course certificate through the same assessment process as a full academic program, right? I mean, there should be some form of assessment, but it's not going to look the same. And so what does that look like? And who owns it if it's this standalone credential that happens to pull courses from multiple disciplines and programs? Because which faculty member is going to draw the short straw of having to then own that assessment, or do we have to bring them all together? And are they going to like coming together for that? Or are they going to view this as this extra thing on top of their programs? And so it's been questions that we've been struggling with at our institution. And I just feel like it's going to be more and more of those questions as we go forward with these different credentials.
A question came up in the chat, Joe, while you were talking. Enrique from Fresno City College wanted to know, how about having a learning institute within colleges or institutions? Do you think that would help fix kind of the divide you're mentioning?
We tried that at Long Beach. We did it the summer right after the pandemic started. And we had, I think, 1,900 participants out of 2,900 faculty on campus. And it was bundled in such a way that people could move in and out of the trainings about, based on what they wanted. Very little was about assessment per se. A lot of it was about how to adapt your courses for an online or alternative mode of instruction or hybrid. But within those spaces, that worked. But I want to sort of throw out an idea, and I've been thinking about this for a while, and that's a relationship between the California community colleges and the CSUs. And I don't mean in terms of the guided pathways, I mean on the other side, because a large number, not a large number, but a significant number of our MA graduates go on to teach in community colleges. So why aren't there closer connections between the CCCs and the CSUs that prepare those master's level students to do good things in the community colleges? I mean, we've had some superstars sort of in our master's program who've gone on and get tenured jobs in local community colleges. But there's almost no sort of systematic training at our institution. And I don't think there is at any other CSU that I know of either for graduate students. Why isn't there a sort of a connection between the chancellor's office and the graduate programs and the chancellor's office at the CCC, right? Or even locally.
You and I think, are made from a very similar cloth, Nancy, as we've had opportunities to talk in the past about, systemic issues need systemic solutions, right? Otherwise, we're doing a lot of Band-Aid work in the meanwhile. Why is the onus, right, on each individual college or institution to fix this problem? What would the vision be, right, of a more streamlined, sensible, clarified way for people who are looking, to become faculty members, to have that on-ramp and to make it supported, and if it could be state supported, even better, right? A formalized agreement between systems there is just such a important thing. But an example to point out, what you were mentioning, Nancy, down here in the San Diego region, we do have related to San Diego State University, what we call SDICA internships. So it's San Diego Imperial County Community College Association. I think I hopefully got all of the acronym letters in there. But it's been in existence, this organization of collective of community colleges within San Diego and Imperial region. They meet, to have presidents talk with one another, vice presidents talk with one another, but also in relation to the university, and actually the program that I'm in, the EDD, is in community college leadership. But they also have related to teaching this internship that any master's student or recent grad could be going through to learn how to teach at a community college with tutelage, right, from a master teacher in their area, getting paired with that. Here's the thing, I think I would have been a perfect student for that type of program, but I got through my master's program without even knowing that existed. So even though they exist, what are the opportunities to make sure we have those clear onboarding ramps for students? And I think of other exemplary programs, not within the CSU, but with our colleague, Shamini Dias, Dr. Dias at Claremont Graduate University in the Preparing Future Faculty program, right? But that's an opt-in.
Right,
Why aren't we making it more of an expectation?
Well, and there's sort of when you think about institutional roles, there is a lot of opportunity there, because at virtually every CSU campus, the graduate dean is also the person who's in charge of assessment and accreditation on campus.
There are a couple of different themes that emerged, and I'll leave it up to the panelists which way they'd like to pursue. But one that I was listening to was the notion of being able to transcend the traditional silos. And I'm curious, Stacey, like I'm seeing it on my own campus, the way it's manifesting in terms of guided pathways and how the two sides of the house are talking to each other more in partnership. But I'm curious if you'd like to speak to that. The other one is I'm still also very curious about how our traditional learners are being really overtaken by the type of student who may have been in the workforce for a while, is coming back for retraining. You have a lot of people coming from the military who are opening now. And so in what ways that's going to impact assessment, and also even how we offer our instructional programming, so that way they can get some of those other traditional type of certifications of higher education.
I'll jump on that first part, Karen, about I think the following through on the opportunities for de-siloing around some of the work that's been going on and kind of leading up to this point. And then, we have some very clear call to action within the past few years for really being the moral compass, right, for why we're doing the work. If it wasn't clear before, the pain and suffering our students are going through for a variety of reasons right now, I think becomes even more of a clear impetus for we need to do something differently. We need to imagine a better future for our students and also for ourselves, for how we work together, and what our learning institutions could look like in the future. In terms of the de-siloing, what I've kind of seen and noticed is, hopefully that kind of natural de-siloing and people reaching across the aisle to work more collaboratively together would be happening anyways. But I think it's really also been spurred on by the redesign itself, right? Because people are realizing, oh, I can't do the depth of this work by myself in a silo, because it's going to take a full team, right? Thinking about the learning journey a student makes, so many people are involved in pieces of that. And, they're hopping from instruction related things to student services related things. And, an instructor can be that handoff person using an early alert, or regardless if you have an early alert, if you have a relationship with somebody over a counselor, for example, a STEM pathway, this is a STEM pathway student, you have a relationship with a STEM counselor, you can ask them to reach out, or the ed advisor, right? The triage support system. I think it's really getting to activate people to see that sense of responsibility, not only ending at the very, like the old way we thought of our job descriptions, but what are we doing to holistically support the student? And that oftentimes requires deeper engagement and collaboration with others at our campuses as well. And so, you know, I think that also naturally leads into opportunities to do inquiry together, which I think is so related to, right, the purpose. What is assessment supposed to be for? It's really at the heart of it, doing the inquiry work so we can change ourselves to better serve students, to serve their learning in the most equitable way that we can. So I think there's so many wonderful opportunities there as well. So I'll drop that in the meanwhile.
You know, I think it's also worth mentioning as we think about equity, that we need to also, as much as we need to think about equity for our students, we also need to think about it for ourselves. And this idea of, you know, coming together at the university, we need to make sure that then there's equity among, you know, faculty and staff. And again, I'm wearing my student affairs assessment leaders hat. The whole organization is formed because institutions, you know, almost 15 years ago and still today, you know, I wish we could see people and have hands, but I guarantee there would be far few, if any, hands raised of people saying, yeah, our student affairs divisions have just as much resources as our academic affairs divisions, right? And so I especially mean that in the assessment sense, because few and far between is there a director of student affairs assessment. And if they are, they're almost always an office of one. Whereas you look at an academic affairs assessment director or VP of institutional effectiveness, and explicitly they are charged with academic assessment. And then you think about within the colleges, the support people around data and assessment and analytics. And then you think about if there even are any positions like that on the student affairs side of the house. And so we also need to make sure that as we're looking to come together for collaboration, one of two things need to happen. Either we need to do a better job as stewards of these resources and share and play nice and make it so that, you know, business intelligence and analytics teams are working as much for student affairs as they are for academics, and that they're as accessible. Or we need some parity around, you know, more staffing and employees for student affairs in different pockets of the institution that are going to be elevating their work and doing more of the outreach with faculty and academic affairs. And I just think that's one thing that by nature as educators, we focus so much on the student that, you know, it's almost to our detriment then that we're not thinking about our own environments and the equity and resources that we need. And I think that's been one, you know, downside, but also upside of the pandemic is the more burned out people get, the more it elevates that conversation and presents it in a way that it's like, yeah, you know, we should look at how we're doing and what we need in order to then, you know, fill ourselves up to then best serve our students.
Can I want to add something though, but I want to sort of make sure that everybody knows that, yeah, and I talk to a lot of faculty in our system, not just on my own campus. Faculty feel disempowered when it comes to assessment. The average faculty member teaching classes is not involved in assessment at all, unless it's something like, you know, providing data to a department assessment coordinator who may or may not have any resources allocated. When I was a department chair, our institution limited the assessment coordinator at the department level to $1,000 stipend during the summer to do all of the assessment for the program. You know, don't think that, and I know that student affairs staff, because I've worked with lots of student affairs staff, you know, don't have the same kind of resources that the academic side does. But in a lot of systems, including the CSU, the academic side doesn't have many either. But I want to say something else, and that's, I do a lot of DEI work on our campus. we as faculty members cannot possibly close those equity gaps. We cannot do DEI work unless we have that collaboration with student affairs. And it's just that simple. We can't.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Go for it, Karen.
Okay, I appreciate these comments about equity. That's central to our operations as college educators. And yet what we see manifested is there's an inequity within our own workforce. And that is when we talk about the student services assessment, we conducted a survey, and just for a brief snapshot, we found many people found that it was very under-resourced, whether or not that manifests in terms of having a coordinator to support the professional development and doing really authentic assessment, whether or not that's even setting aside time for staff to engage in that assessment and act on that information. So that's a real problem, being able to elevate both to the importance that they deserve.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And that this conversation is just making me think of some words that have really been resonating with me lately. I've been very fortunate to participate in some National Equity Project professional development series lately that have been very transformational. Highly suggest in case you ever have an opportunity to attendees to look into that. But really reiterating, equity is not just about outcomes, right? Equity is a process and an outcome. And I think so many times we focus on the outcome, but not how we are getting there in a humanized way, right? Attending to all of these things that are going on. And this conversation too about resources and the the realities of trying to do this work in an absence of support just makes me think about the need for ourselves and for the leaders of our institutions. We need to treat each other like we would like our students to be treated ideally, right? High expectations, high support. So what would the high support look like in an ideal environment? And maybe that's something for us to talk about, right? Like ideally, what would this look like to do it well so that we can serve students well?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to pivot a little bit. And what I'm curious about is, here we are, we're in the midst of a pandemic. And the question that's raised here is, what's the silver lining of the pandemic? How has it changed assessment or even instructional design for student learning in positive ways? And has it opened up any new possibilities? That's something that we'll want to adopt long-term.
I'll jump in with something that immediately comes to mind, and I see it both as a positive and a negative that has come up during the pandemic, but related to people feeling the need to have these test proctoring systems and the inherent inequities in them, right? I think that has opened up conversations around what equitable assessment really looks like and feels like to students, because we know that these test proctoring softwares also disproportionately impact our already minoritized students. If you've ever seen the articles, like somebody's baby crying in the background sets off like the fact that, oh, you have like help and you're getting screened and you're cheating and things like that. But if you're living in a one-room apartment trying to support your family, you don't have a lot of other places to put your child while you're taking your test, right? And I think if we zoom back, why are we having to use test proctoring software? If we had better assessments and more authentic assessments, you wouldn't be like the cheating element would not be as easy, right? And then therefore you would not need the test proctoring software. And so I think it's also brought up conversations around, how do we learn to trust our students more, right? And what are we doing to set up the motivation and the way that we structure our courses so that it can be more intrinsic rather than this like artificial grade point system not focused on the learning. So I think those are things that have been coming up. Unfortunately, I've seen some institutions take the wrong approach, or some departments take the wrong approach and really double down on the test proctoring. But at least the conversations are being had, right, around what does it mean to authentically assess students and do so in an equitable way.
Yeah, I think something that happened to our campus is we went all in on Quality Matters because it was a, straight off the shelf training package. And a lot of faculty went through those various training modules, and they continue to pursue, if not Quality Matters, at least online stuff. And I think that's been positive in part because it gave faculty members, in particular, both full and adjunct faculty members. I don't want to say part-time because a lot of adjuncts are full-time. It gave them the language of assessment. They learned for the first time what a measurable student learning outcome was. They learned about the concept of alignment, and they're walking away from, a lot of people tell me they're walking away from those programs saying, wow, this has transformed what I do in the regular classroom. And I think that's a positive. And I think a couple of other positives, students have been driving some of these changes as well. Every class on my campus has a Discord channel. And most faculty members, when this first started, faculty members were saying, oh, they're just using it to cheat with each other. And as a PD provider, my point was maybe they're trying to augment their learning by having collaboration discussions. And so little light bulbs were going off in faculty minds that maybe Discord channels and sort of out of class learning were actually good things. And that was something that technology drove, but I think is going to stay with us.
One of the things I think about that's a silver lining to the pandemic is, and Stacey touched on this a bit, there's been a unwinding a little bit and simplification of assessment. I think there was a lot of panic and potentially rightfully so of pivoting to online, and what was put in place was not possible to execute according to plan. But it also gave this awesome opportunity to step back and say, well, but what is the learning we're hoping for? And can we still instill that with students, give them opportunity to demonstrate it, even if it looks different than what the original curriculum was or the original plan was. And I appreciated then that the conversation became less about, executing this specific measurement or, like we need to adopt this, technology. And instead was, well, let's talk about what the student is supposed to be getting from this course, from this intervention. And then how can the student demonstrate that they have that competency? And if they don't, what can we do to help them shore that up and get what they need before they move on to the next course or leave with their program? And I think that, I enjoyed then those conversations of returning to, well, what's core of what we're trying to do and how can we still focus on that, and then determine the appropriate measures as well as interpret the information in a way that still has meaning. Because then on the reporting side of things, people panicked as well of, well, how much value is this data because of how the year was or how programs were thrown off. But there's still value in because the students were still experiencing it. The students are still this is still their experience. And so this isn't something you just, throw out, or this isn't something you just discredit. You still take it for what it is. And again, think about, well, what was supposed to happen here? How close was the reality to that? And how can we still help and support students on their way to success? As well as to Nancy's point too, I think it also afforded an opportunity in a good way for institutions then to think about, wow, we could be better supporting and providing resources for our faculty and staff to do their jobs and to navigate different learning environments and to use new tools, right? That before maybe we were saying, no, you can't use like hypothesis, or you can't use like these recorded discussions because you are going to use the written discussion board because that is what, you know, has been prescribed and that's what's in the course. But then we realized that, oh, wait, learning can happen in different ways, and we can look at this in different ways, and we can accept more ideas from people who are finding innovative and sustainable solutions that are helpful and beneficial to all and that students are responding to. So I think there has been some community building as well as some innovation that's been coming about, as well as, again, some returning to the core of what we're trying to do in these times.
Yeah, I am curious, when we talk about the innovative solutions, I am thinking back to Dr. Mazur's talk this morning, and he says it's all about backwards design. You've got the outcomes, and then what is the acceptable evidence, and then how does that impact the instructional approach? Did you see any of those types of changes that you thought were best practices? Like, for instance, moving away from the high stakes exam.
Yeah, I think throughout the CSU we did. I'm on the online ed sort of chancellor's office group, and I think there was a lot of innovation going on our campuses, and it was driven by the pandemic. And it was all of a sudden a lot of faculty members, in particular faculty members, seeing, wow, some of this technology could be really helpful, like perusal. Who would have thunk that a social media annotation tool would have helped learning? And I think it really, I think in many ways, as much as I don't like the pandemic, I think it was fortuitous for a lot of us in the CSU. Don't quote me on that, please.
Nothing like a crisis to actually make change happen, right? I'm thinking of just how many people on campuses were like, this needs to be a paper form and you have to take it, you know, by hand to 5 departments and get your signatures on it. Like, oh, what happens when you can't actually go and do that, right? And just thinking of like all of those little things that add up to a lot in terms of the student's experience and potential stop out points, right? If a student was a primarily online student, but we were forcing them to come to campus for certain things and they couldn't, in the past, what did that mean, right? Or they couldn't physically come to campus for your office hours or for instructional support before, right? Because they could have their little bit of time to maybe physically go to class, but they're swamped with everything else. They could step aside during break to call you, but if that wasn't an option before, right? I think there are so many things like that that we really are now just opening the doorway to more of that innovation. And I'm hoping that's being built on kind of this mentality that we've been growing for several years of realizing, yes, we needed to do something different. And this was the spark to make some of that happen and get rid of that bureaucratic red tape, to trying different things and actually having that ability to do some risk taking, to do something different.
One thing, two things I would add. One is, I think they're just by nature of checking in with students more about how the experience was going. I think there were both natural as well as opportunities to more intentionally integrate more lower stakes formative assessments throughout courses, and by doing so, lower the stakes of what were the high stakes summative assessments, you know, whether that's an exam or a much bigger paper, to simplify it to a more concise reflection, because we had the more intentional formative check-ins along the way to support the student learning and experience. There also was this cool opportunity of you know, student affairs areas we're seeing, and it varied. This wasn't a success story everywhere, but some areas saw a through the roof engagement of students, especially during like lockdown times of the pandemic, going to like online events and Zoom community hangouts because they just were craving engagement with people. and then because they were seeing this shift of student services and student engagement moving more online, that was then their way of staying engaged and communicate and connecting with one another and still learning and experiencing efforts outside the classroom. And there was this opportunity for faculty to come together and talk to student affairs and say, hey, how can we do more of this so that our classroom experience isn't just about the material and isn't just about, okay, you're here, we are starting the lecture, but instead to more intentionally dedicate time towards that engagement and community building, because we know, going back to Stacey's point earlier about, kindness and seeing one another, that we needed to do that with our students, and we still need to do that. And so it's just great opportunity to tap into our student affairs folks who, majority of them, their master's programs are about student learning and development and community and studying practices on best ways to build this, and having icebreakers and activities that are real short, as well as ones where they're a little longer. And so that was a cool, successful success story that happened here and there. Now, it didn't always happen everywhere. In some institutions, their online engagement tanked, which is unfortunate, but it was a silver lining aspect that was cool to see in pockets.
Conversation and going backwards to the comments about backwards design has just been making me think of conversations I've been having, within this past half year, 8 months, around the critical need, right, to hone those outcomes and really center in and use that to inform the backwards design. But I've also been thinking about and talking about with people is we get so focused on those kind of like quantitative metric-y type outcomes that we forget the other pieces of what we are trying to build towards other outcome wise, right? So I've been trying to distill and think about this as not only what students should achieve, whether it's a momentum point, course success, or like graduation or transfer, those types of things that we're used to seeing a lot of data on. What should students be learning, which I think is why we are all here. But then also these other important points of how should students feel, right? Like what's the affective component of what we are trying to build into the classroom experience? And how do we think about that as being part of the curriculum and how we actually structure and set up a classroom or our learning environments in general? And then the last thing, the fourth thing is who should students have meaningful connections with as an outcome, right? So hopefully for the instructors, of course, you're having a meaningful connection with the instructor, but also the students, or are there meaningful connections that can be made with student services professionals, right? This the wraparound support. How are they getting connected to their larger community in their field of study? How are they connecting and thinking ahead to, connecting early with job and career people that might be already working? How are we thinking holistically about learning environments, I think is where we're going, right? So we've gone from metric-y achievement outcomes. We're doing a better job of focusing on student learning, but I think that's the next wave is really about humanizing those learning environments as well, to think about holistically supporting the human individuals who are there to be growing and developing as part of their learning.
Here, here.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, whew, that's great. I'm totally on the same wavelength with you, Stacey. And that was actually a question I was going to pose in response to some of the things that Joe was saying earlier too. And people they frame them in terms of equity, because what you're talking about is in terms of the online environment, it's about access, especially if it's an asynchronous setup for students. The other part is then how do you foster that sense of community in an online environment so that way students feel vested and they feel intrinsically motivated to be part of that community and to actively engage with that community. And so if we don't address that affective domain, then we may lose the students. If the focus is entirely on cognitive, we risk losing the students. Stacey, Joe, or Nancy, would you like to further comment on?
Yeah, I can just give anecdotal stuff. I think that some of the more successful instructors who do this are people who have already thought deeply and meaningfully about the connections between the curriculum and careers. I think some instructors intentionally treat students as, and I certainly do this in of course I teach for pre-credential elementary school teachers, treat them as the pre-service professionals they are, and design activities so that they can sort of develop that professional identity, that pre-professional identity. And I think that's really an important thing, that they begin to, especially at the junior and the senior levels, they begin to see themselves not just as college students, but as teachers, or as, you know, business professionals, or as graduate students, or, you know, they begin to see that they have some agency over their learning. And I think that's really important. That's an important affective and sort of metacognitive activity for them to start thinking, reflecting on, what is this all about?
Yeah, just to build on that too, that then whatever they're learning is relevant to them because they know it will be expected of them in the field. And so it's giving them that experience beforehand. There was an interesting comment that came up in the chat too from Manuel, and it was regarding the project-based learning. And so if it's, instead of taking this high stakes exam or a couple exams, right, then the project-based learning, they're actually applying what they're learning that could be mimicking the work environment or larger societal environment too, for civic engagement. Tina, were there additional questions or comments you wanted to bring our attention to? Because we've got about 3 more minutes.
Yeah, no, I've been keeping an eye. I want to tell all the panelists they've been doing a great job monitoring the chat also, because I've noticed everybody's been responding to everybody. Yeah, so I've been keeping an eye and trying to bring any comments forward, but for the most part, it seems like a lot of people are on board with our earlier conversation about training for future faculty, and the whole idea of what authentic assessment is, and treating students as human beings, right? That they are each individually unique. But I think that's also, you know, another panel, like how do we shape that, and how do we have a conversation to where we individually and authentically look at students? Because teaching a class, you have to remember, yes, you have the goal of teaching the material, but how do you get the students to have buy-in? How do they feel like they are participating and they have agency? I really loved when Nancy said that they have agency within the course, because then they want to participate and continue their learning.
To quickly put a little plug, I think, related to so much of what we've been talking about today into the chat. So thank you for those who were able to make our session earlier, but we've been so just enthralled and inspired by so many of the examples that we've gotten from educational institutions, especially our California community college partners within the past few years of doing this amazing work of recentering and humanizing that learning environment for students. But we try to capture some of those resources in there. So we wanted to provide that to you all in case to follow up on some of these conversations, right? About that formative assessment, about creating authentic learning environments, around rethinking different strategies, transparent assessment design, all of those things. So I hope that might be of help and support to some of the attendees in chat.
And I'll do the same and just promote the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders has a totally free, self-paced 8-week or 8-module open course on applying and leading assessment and student affairs. So if you want to know more about assessment and student affairs, it's great. Likewise, many of the underlying principles are just good assessment principles. So even if you're an academic affairs assessment person, it's a great resource. Again, totally free. you retain access to it well after it's over. So even if you're like, I don't have time for a course right now, that's fine. Just sign up, because we just want to promote the resource. And yeah, registration is open until late March. Course runs February 7th through April 3rd. The website has, yeah, there's the link. That's the link to the website, which has the syllabus, a link to registration, and all sorts of information, including a 95-page report of last year's data that I did. So check it out if you like. And happy to answer questions about that since I'm involved with the course.
Yeah, and I just threw NILOA's publications in there because I think although a lot of them are pretty technical, I think there are some of the shorter reports that are really important.
Great. Thank you for sharing those resources and also your expertise on this panel. This has been really great. I wish we had more time for it, but now you've got the contact information of everyone in that panel. And so if you'd like to further reach out, and by the way, I've done that workshop, that 8-week series, Joe, and I found it really helpful, even though I've been leading professional development around it on my campus. Thank you very much. All right, everybody, just a little reminder, we've got about 15 minutes until we go on to the next workshop that starts at 2 o'clock. But if you'd like to hang out, the panelists are here if you'd like to continue to pose questions